Greetings, folks. So we are introducing the latest episode of the Vernon Richard Show. This one is, it's another one that I very much enjoyed. It was a question from one of our listeners / viewers that we follow on LinkedIn. Thierry, trunk-based Thierry. In fact, does he listen? I have no idea. But we stalked him on LinkedIn. He asked a good question, and we answered it here. And it's a question around learning how to code as a tester. How do you do that? What should the plan look like? We talked about lots of different topics. We played around with, well, what do the words in this question even mean? What are the concepts here? Is there a different way to interpret this? As we like to do, as we warm up and our brains start to engage, we start to think about, oh, I wrote this thing. Oh, wait, I've already answered this question. I wrote this thing. We remember some training materials that we've seen out in the wild over the years that try and address this question. So the show notes are going to be absolutely, like, I am very excited to do the show notes for this episode, because I'm just going to add in a lot of extra stuff that wasn't mentioned, was kind of alluded to. And Rich, being the automation expert in this little duo, he had lots of very interesting things to say, as usual. So yeah, enjoy the episode. Are you going to say anything? This was all me.
Enjoy. I am a robot.
Enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Vernon Richard Show. Hello.
Yay! Whoop, whoop, whoop.
So, we are doing pretty well recently, I would say, Vern. We've got a good cadence going at the moment, and when we can't make our usual slot, we're filling in like tonight on a Friday evening. Living the dream.
Rock and roll, Rich. Everyone else is having a nice time partying, doing whatever, and here we are here recording the podcast because we're dedicated. We're dedicated, man. We're taking this thing very seriously.
If I could hang out with you every Friday, I'd take it.
Who are you and what have you done with Richard?
Still in Turkey, Richard. left him behind.
Yeah. Please send your best wishes to Rich. He's still on his post-holiday come down. He's had a wonderful time in Turkey, and now he's just absolutely fed up and miserable. Although the weather here is awesome, so I hope that's putting a smile on your face.
I missed the heat wave, but I like it was 37 in Turkey, so it was like at least I was in somewhere that had a pool. Well, they had like loads of pools, but they had loads of pools and air conditioning. Whereas here, everyone was, sat in our houses that are not designed for 32-degree heat.
They are designed to contain the heat,
exactly.
Which is not great when it's 32 degrees outside. But I would say you absolutely did not miss the heat wave. That sounds awesome. 37 degrees.
Yeah. Oh no, it was toasty. It was definitely toasty. So, what's new, Vern? Anything new? You doing anything? You signed to do anything? What's happening?
Am I doing anything new? So I'm going to be speaking at Aura Dev in the autumn, so that's good. And I in a fit of unbelievable organization, I booked my tickets not at the last minute. Aura Dev is really cool. They send you all this stuff to help you book, and you can just do it online, and so you don't have to pay and then claim it back. They just sort everything out for you. And then, so I hear, this didn't apply to me, but so I hear, if they give you a deadline by which to book. And if, as you approach the deadline, they send you, let's call them reminder emails if you haven't booked. I mean, that's what I hear. Doesn't apply to me, clearly. So I got that sorted out. I have an abstract to write because I'm going to go to a peer, one of these peer testing workshop things in North Wales with Christopher Chant. But I haven't done my abstract, so Micah yelled at me. She nudged me again on DM, and so did Yoop.
Is there a topic for it?
The theme is constraints.
Okay, nice.
So yeah, I've got a few ideas, but they're not. I don't know. I think to be honest, what I want to do is go there and get advice. I don't actually have any ideas. It's more, hey, I need some advice. I found out that I was talking to some of my teammates, and the way that some of the team that they are in is doing some stuff that I didn't know they were doing. So I was like, oh, if I'd known that, I would have tried to pitch in a little bit sooner. So I want some ideas about what I can do with them. And data. I'm not ready to talk about it on the podcast yet because I feel like I'm underprepared. But that's another. I think there's another topic there I could talk about when it comes to constraints around the data that you're being asked for and the data that you would prefer to provide.
I'm immediately
There's
drawn
bit
to
of a constraint there.
Yeah, I'm immediately drawn to testability. Like, I think we mentioned this on the pod before. Like, for me, testability is an interpretation of some facts, right? And the way you interpret that, like, the same set of facts could be a constraint for someone else and a perfectly green light for somebody else because they have a different set of skills, right? You know, if like I'm trying to think of an example, we're going to discuss automation. That might be a good one, right? If it was you need to do some really complex API automation and you've never done it before, that might feel like a constraint. Whereas if like it was me, I'd be like, "Oh, that's fine. Off we go." Like I wouldn't even see a constraint. So,
well, another angle to take could be that constraints come with a connotation that they're bad, and that isn't always the case.
that's true.
You know, in the world of Cynefin world, I've not looked into Cynefin actually for a long time. Bad Vernon. But there's a concept there that around enabling constraints, I think, and constraints that help you move forward. The paradox of choice, I guess, springs to mind, and all that kind of thing. So
See, there we go. Sorted.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. That sounds cool.
Yeah, that'll be good. I'll be taking my daughter with me because that is a thing. When I went to the first one a few years ago, she had to come with me because the rest of the family were busy, but it turned out to be awesome because we had a nice road trip to North Wales, mate, if you've not been to North Wales, people, fix that. It is absolutely beautiful. It's so beautiful. It's so green.
It is.
Oh my God. So yeah, that's what's coming up for me. I'm sure there's some stuff that I'm forgetting.
Excellent. Right. Well, we are going to answer a question from Thierry Depau. You reckon that's about right?
Yeah, trunk-based Thierry.
Yeah, so that's his nickname, trunk-based Thierry, because he's very, very against trunk-based development. Like, that's his stance. It's like he is completely against it. No, I'm joking. He's absolutely for it. If you mention feature branches,
whoa,
like
don't do that.
Sit down and brace yourself in.
Yeah, don't do that within arm's reach of Thierry because he might put you in a headlock.
Yeah, but he basically, he posted this question. I'm going to ask it because we all know that. I think people would expect me to start answering this, but I'm curious to see Vernon answer this because
what? Really? Bloody hell! Okay.
Well, I'm curious from you've managed and led a lot more testers than I have, I would say, and you might have come across this from a like directing other people, whereas I can answer this from a this is what I've done and this is what I've taught people to do. But I've not in recent times have I had to like actually lead someone and manage someone on this journey. But yeah, let's ask the question. So he posted this on LinkedIn a good probably 3-4 weeks ago now. How do you see a growth plan for testers in test automation as a personal development plan? So how do you go from novice to advanced? What would be the measurable targets you want to achieve? And what resources should they master? And then he later goes on to then say, I've always questioned whether this is actually a good thing because test automation is code. We've all had that conversation, but test automation is code. It should have production code levels of quality, if not better. It needs decent coding skills. Is that something testers should really acquire? And I'm guessing he's written that in a way against like potentially other skills maybe that might be more important. And obviously it helps with creating cross-functional teams and T-shaped roles. So it's a massive question, but essentially it is, I think,
It's a massive
what's that
question.
career path?
I think I think we're going to be on this question for the whole episode, I reckon.
I think so too,
yeah. So how do you see a growth plan for testers in test automation as a personal development plan? So I have helped a few testers create a personal development plan for test automation, and I have to say it is usually focused very much around learning a particular tool. And I think he's right when he picks up on it later on in the question when he talks about production level codes of quality and decent coding skills and things of that nature, because that's not something that I've included when I've helped people come up with their development plans in the past. In my current role, I'm going to be creating some development plans for people in the weeks and months ahead. So that is something that I would try and factor in a bit more. I think more explicitly. I think is that this is code, and therefore, if we're going to be writing this code, we need to be writing it properly. But the thing that this doesn't talk about, or maybe it's in the question, the thing that I worry about with this is that we focus too much on the tooling and not on the kind of the overarching craft of software testing. Like, what is it when you're being a top level tester, when you're being a more strategic quality engineer? Like, what does that look like? And then how does code and your understanding of code feed into that? Something that I've helped kind of, there've been a few occasions where I've almost steered people, in fact, not even almost, I have steered people away from test automation and tried to get them to learn about code. Like, what even is code? What are architectures, and why are you so focused on learning test automation? Air quotes, test automation, trademark. Do you know what I mean? Is it to make yourself more employable from a market perspective? Is it to make you more effective in your job? Is it to segue into some kind of development path, or is it to, just to be a more effective tester? And I've tried to help people broaden their understanding of what technical testing looks like, to think beyond GUI automation whenever I get the chance. But it's a really good question. The measurable targets, so he later says, from novice to advanced, what would be measurable targets to achieve? I think you do have to make those things tangible. If you just start out and say, I just want to learn test automation, that's a little bit too woolly. It's imprecise. Like, what does it mean? Yeah. What is it that you would like to be able to do in the future that you can't do now? And why? And like, again, can you be specific? Is there something that you would like to do? And trying to help people articulate that and then point them at the resources is important. So that's what I've done in the past. I think I'm going to be doing a lot more of this in my current role, because the team that I work with now, a bunch of those folks want to improve their technical testing. We've got people who are interested in test automation, as I think Thierry has mentioned it here, the GUI automation. But we've also got people who are interested in security testing. We've got people who are really interested in performance testing, accessibility, and all of these things are impacted by how well you understand the underlying architecture, code, and tools. And I think, as I said before, I think we gravitate towards tool instead of what are the underlying coding principles that I need to learn in order to leverage these tools much more effectively. Because you can learn the tool without learning the principles and your code would look horrific. So for the first part of that question, what do you think?
Oof.
Just that first para. And
Yeah.
we can get to the
So,
second one later. So it
well,
says, how do you see a growth plan for testers in test automation as a personal development plan from novice to advanced? And what would be measurable targets to achieve? And what
yeah.
resources should they master?
So the first thing I'm drawn to, as always with me, is what is test automation in the context of this question, right? So if it's automating tests, on different layers of a system, then I would probably answer this in one way, and I think that's probably where this question is going. However, if this was someone who wanted to be adept and skilled at utilizing software to assist with testing problems, I would now answer that in a very different way, because I think we've almost. I've just written an article about this. Actually, it'll be. I don't know when it won't be out by the time this comes out, but I've been teaching automation and testing for I don't know how long it's been now, 8-9 years, and our ethos in this is that it's always around tools that support testing efforts. So some of those tools are things that you download, Playwright, Selenium, JUnit, testing frameworks, and you stitch them together with a little bit of code and you've got yourself a tool, right? But you've built that tool. You've made that tool for what you need it to do. Even if you download Playwright now, the way you choose to use Playwright is very custom to what you're testing. So you've built yourself a tool. And now I obviously in AIT, I teach people to be number one, how to identify problems. That's the second half of the question. But once you've got a problem, how do you then pick how to solve it, right? The cliche of if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And that's where a lot of people have been in their automation journey. I feel they mastered Selenium, they mastered Playwright, and now every time they look at a test, they just immediately see a UI test and don't look at it and go, I wonder what else we could test here. I wonder how this whole system works. I wonder what happens when I click that button. Could I test that in isolation? Is there already unit tests for that? Do I even need to test this? I could go on and on and on. And that's a very different journey of teaching and development. Now, if I do go back and think that it's standard automation, I say standard automation, actually, this was quite funny, Vern. This will make you laugh. So in this article, I couldn't think of a term for automation as we currently call it. So I ended up going with traditional automation because it was the closest thing I could think of. Because now we've got AI and other tooling. It was I literally labeled it as traditional automation because it's different now that we can do different types of tool and different types of automation now. You could have a string of agents doing stuff now, right? We couldn't do that before. We could only have deterministic stuff. So I almost feel we need a name now to distinguish these two, which is why I picked up on what test automation is. But if it is automated testing, I would say they need to understand how to design a UI test. So nothing to do with the tool here, nothing to do with the specific tool. It's how do you break down a flow on a UI into smaller chunks and identify what you need to click for, what you need to wait for, what's the order. All that is completely tool agnostic. And then I would say you need to be able to implement that in a specific tool. API testing, there's contract testing. They've just written an article about this as well, which I was slamming before this call, as in saying, it didn't feel like, as in there's different risks you can do on an API, right? So that there's that conversation. And then, so UI would be a must. An API framework would be a must. Nowadays, a visual testing, probably even component testing tool would probably be advisable as well. And then when it comes to code, I still think I actually still think with my same ideas I've had for a while. I think you need a scripting language and you need an object-oriented language. Nowadays, we have TypeScript. It kind of flirts between both of them and is very popular. But prior to that, I would have sold someone, you need to learn either Java or C#, and you then need to go learn JavaScript. And that every time I said that, my old colleague Mark Winsford would laugh at me because I hate JavaScript. He would be like, "You can't say that, Richard. You hate Java." I do. I hate it. but it's become so popular and it's everywhere. All the UI frameworks are based on it. So having an understanding of how JavaScript works really improves your ability to automate. So that would be my general one. Measurable targets, being able to automate on multiple layers. Resources, I can't think of any specific resources, but as I said, it would be an OO language, a scripting language, and a framework capable, a tool that can do API UI testing, potentially then component and visual on top of that. But I could also answer that question a very different way. So,
well, yeah, it's I've also written a blog post to attempt to answer a question similar to this. Before I started this current role where I'm in a bit more of a leadership position, and the question was one that I found on Reddit. It was from a chap who's currently a manual tester and was kind of thinking, look, I need to update my skills, and he kind of alluded to the fact that it might be there might be some time pressure, but he wasn't explicit about it. So I answered it in two different ways. I kind of said, look, if there's like an ASAP answer, and then there's a no, this like it's just something I feel like I need to do, and there's no immediate danger of being, me needing to find a job ASAP. So
yeah.
I provided two different answers, and while you were explaining your first thoughts on this question, I went and found it, and I talked about some of the things that you mentioned. I basically said to this person, if you have no time, and this is an ASAP situation, like the house is on fire, you should definitely focus on API testing and GUI automation, just from a marketability point of view. And I've kind of directed him to the classic spots like test automation, university.
Yeah.
I've directed him to people for the GUI automation stuff, and then to people like Amber Race and Marie Cruz and our pal Winteringham, Lewis Prescott as well for the API stuff. That's an ASAP answer, and then the other answer was, I started talking about all kinds of stuff. I started talking about let's see, geez. One thing I said was improve your technical skills. So don't just limit yourself to APIs
well. Yeah.
and GUIs. Think about build tools, think about databases, cloud technologies, bash scripts, Git, all of this stuff. These are all technical skills that will supplement, actually, even if you were going to focus on just GUI automation or API testing. Any one of those things would supplement yourself. Oh,
yeah.
am I back?
No, you're still there. Yeah. No, sorry, mate.
Yeah. Any one of those skills would supplement what you learn with Playwright or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I directed them to some paid and some free. I'll link to this article in the show notes. And then I also advise this person to go read. Just find some blogs of some prominent people in the industry and just go and read. And then anyone that they refer to, go and read that stuff as well. Do you know what I mean?
Daisy chain.
And I think the last thing I said was basically don't forget about the fact that we're actually trying to test this thing.
Yeah.
So
there's two things you've just hit on there, mate. There's two things that are like. So, like, if I took my answer and I mentioned learning the tools and the language, right? Let's say I know Playwright inside and out, right? I know every single API feature of it. I can't write a UI test because I know the tool, but I don't know how to design a test. I don't know how to find locators. I don't know how to use developer tools. I don't know I don't know the knowledge of my app. There's so many other skills that are more important than the actual framework that don't get spoken about, and we bundle them under like technical knowledge, right, and stuff like this. But and that reminded me of an answer that I'd given someone when you mentioned finding a blog. My brain was like, you wrote something similar, and it was the best automated testers, and that's a silly term, right? Because it sounds like you're testing automation, right? But the best SDETs or quality engineers that I know who do a lot of automation have mastered exploratory testing or manual testing in their careers prior to it.
That is a shout. That is a massive shout indeed. Indeed.
And
Indeed.
that is a truth, and like that's what I've always found baffling with the fact that the way we have taught people automation. And like again, I'm thinking back to some of the talks I've given now, like a lot of stuff's coming back to me where I've been like, you look at some of the certs in the automation space, like, you know, the established ones, and it was still very much tool heavy. If you googled it, it was all the courses at the time before AIT came out were all 3 days learning Selenium, 3 days doing this, and they highlighted the tool. They didn't highlight the process, the flow, the understanding of how to look at a UI and break it down into chunks. They didn't talk anything about that, or how to design a good test. And like, I've then met SDETs in my career who have gone straight into SDET roles. And
Yeah.
This is a massive generalization now, right? But their tests suck. Their tests are terrible. They're badly named. They're not in the right flow. They're not mitigating the right risk. Their assertions are shocking because they've not been taught how to do it. And it's better than some, but it's not great.
I've met some of those people as well. And they need, you know, the classic scenario where someone is an SDET or whatever, and you know, you hand them a pile of regression tests and say, just go and automate those.
Yeah, that happened to me.
I've met people who actually can't function without that pile. They don't know where to start.
And that's interesting though, because that actually, like, I would probably have gone, oh, that's awful many years ago. Whereas now, in a part of Thierry's second part of Thierry's question around cross-functional teams, I actually don't think that's that bad anymore if you're in a context. For example, you've got, I remember, what's the guy who loves orange from North America? Eric Davis. Eric Davis, yeah, he loves, that guy loves orange.
Does he?
But he had, I remember him telling a story of having a colleague who was refused to do anything automation based. Refused. Like, the whole career path was there. He was like, no, I'm not doing it. And they kept him on because he was amazing at manual testing, exploratory testing. And they got into a situation where he would write the scripts and hand it over to someone. And in that context, it worked because that person did just want to write code and that person did just want to write scripts. And I'm actually seeing that more and more now in modern teams where in planning sessions, we discuss what should be automated. And I even talk about my sacred model in the same way. You can write a blueprint for a test as a skilled tester, and I don't care who implements it.
No,
I don't care.
No.
As long as that risk gets mitigated and that oracle and that assertion is used, that would be a much better test than if I'd just given it to someone who isn't as skilled as risk management and breaking down tests and designing tests. I've given them really good assertions. That's the assertions. Go off and find the right tool to do it. So I think, my conclusion, I joked to you about answering this question on the pod because I would have spent like 4 days writing an answer to Thierry. Those skills are so much more important. And I think when we talk about measurable targets, one of the things that we always did in AIT was, the whole purpose of AIT was to enable you to be effective in any context. It was not about tools. It was about understanding the context of problems. We taught people how to find tools. You know, we like, now you know what your test looks like. Go find a tool. It wasn't, here's the tool, now design your test. It was, what's the context? What's the risk? What would a test look like? What tooling would you need to be able to do that test? Which is also another tangent to go on, but I'm not going to go on. But is when people have one tool to rule them all, you're so flawed. You end up bending your risks to fit the tool instead of actually mitigating it as you would want to. And then sometimes, some cases, you almost fool yourself into thinking you've automated it the way that you would do it, but you didn't, because the tool doesn't allow you to do that. So you end up with a slightly weaker test than you would if you just went and added a second tool into the mix. But then people don't want to do that sometimes. So
I've seen people like Alan Richardson talk about this. I mean, I've been in workshops of his going back years, where he would talk about the fact that you essentially, he would in the workshop and obviously in the real world, well, he's training for the real world, so he'll try and solve a problem with tool A, and then he'd solve it, and then he'd solve it again with tool B,
Yeah.
and then he would solve it again with tool C, and then he would like he's just for the reason that you described, because you don't know what situation you're going to be in from 1 minute to the next. You may not have access to your favored tool, and so just to kind of flex your muscles and stay, from a
Yeah.
testability and testing and software engineering point of view, stay flexible. You know what I mean? Stay functional.
Absolutely, yeah. Stay fluid.
And I thought that was really interesting. Something else that someone did years ago, Noah Sussman.
Yeah.
Shout out to you, Noah. I hope you are well. I haven't spoken to you for a long time. But and by the way, the show notes in this one are going to be nuts. Like if you are looking, if there's a tester in your life who is trying to get better at testing, including the more technical side of testing, these are the show notes for them. Goodness gracious. But Noah, some years ago, hang on, I've found that as well while we're chatting. He created a first draft of a table of contents for a book that he said, well, I might potentially be writing this book to help people learn technical testing. And he just said, here are the chapters and the things that I'm going to cover. And he just starts from his first step is
I need that. Yeah, I need
use PHP to build your own website.
PHP. Oh.
Remember, this is years ago. So,
yeah, no, it's all good.
But I don't know. From what I remember about Noah, he would probably still pick PHP now anyway.
He would, yeah.
But he's ultimately saying build the website just with HTML, just with PHP, and then the next step is, okay, use CSS and JavaScript, and the dev tools while building your site. You don't have to do anything fancy, just use it. And then he starts going into Bash, and he goes, oh, use links dump to retrieve the contents of your website. And he just starts going through all these different things. And I think what he's demonstrating there is the thing that we were talking about, which is, do you understand the fundamentals first before you try and automate anything to do with this application? I can remember Michael Larson actually started trying to go through this at one point on his blog. I'll try and find I'll try and find the links to that as well. It's going back some years, but it was good.
I've been writing notes in the bottom of this doc that I've noticed Vernon seeing me write, it just reminded me of another one, because this, in my company that I work at now, we're having similar conversations, right? And we've had similar conversations on this pod before. We talk about generalist specialists, right? And we talk about being an engineer. And in the automation space, we talk about automators and we talk about SDETs. And if I was pushed, I could probably make very clear distinctions between those roles. And then, you stick quality engineer in there as well. And then we've been discussing in the past as well, like what hat are you wearing? And if you want to be a technical tester or a very skilled automator, you have to have that engineering core in you.
I think you do.
You have to have it. You can't, like you mentioned earlier, you mentioned, I now know Playwright. Yeah, but do you know Git? Do you know an IDE? Do you know Bash? Do you know all these other basic things that someone like me might take for granted? I
was going to say basic.
Yeah, probably not me, because I've spent a long time reversing these skills to teach them. But some engineers don't even realize they have a skill. Like, they just assume everyone knows this. And it's like, well, no, you've done a computing degree. That's where you've got that from.
Very human thing to do that.
Yeah, you spent your 14 to 8, when you were 14 to 18, you spent it hacking websites for friends.
Yeah.
So you've picked these things up. And I think that is going, as we go forward, and I've just written an article around AI, and I talk about being AI literate. I think, again, it's the same concept now. I think we there's a course thing that we kind of talk about with engineers, as in, can you code? Can you do technical stuff, right? But I think now anyone in software engineering is almost going to have this AI literate kind of slice through them. Not to be a master of it, but to know enough, like, what's an agent? What's Gen AI? What's this? What's machine learning? What's this type of AI? What are some of the constraints? And I don't want to go down an AI rabbit hole, but like, it's just because it's a popular topic. But
Yeah.
we're going to need that layer, and I think within this question from Thierry, there's a vertical slice that probably needs to exist with anyone who's attempting to do automation work or SDET work.
I am now excited to go back to work and like put down what a growth plan might look like and look at what some of the existing growth plans we've got for some of the people in the teams, because another assumption that is baked into this, and I don't know if this is what you just said, but it's this assumption that it's the testers alone that need to learn the tool. You know, shout out to I'm working with a really cool team. Was it last week or the week before? I think it was 2 weeks ago. One of my teammates ran a workshop where she introduced her dev teammates to Cypress with the intention that we're all going to be writing these tests. So I need to introduce you to this tool. And some of you are more or less comfortable with TypeScript. I mean, I'm comfortable with it because I've been, working with this tool for a while, and it was brilliant. And it's almost, and what is absolutely going to, I mean, they're at the start of that journey. But what's absolutely going to happen is there's going to be some cross-pollination. So because I've worked with enough developers to know that they have an allergic reaction that is extremely useful for their job. Like, they do not like repeating themselves. They do not like doing the same thing. If they have to do it 3 times, it's just instant rage, and I've got to fix that with a tool or a process or some kind of automated thing.
Absolutely.
And so what's going to happen is what's the right way to put this? Testers would probably write tests that look like a tester has written them.
Well, that ties nicely into the next question.
That's
exactly.
That's a generalization.
Yeah, I
but
know exactly what you're saying.
As those devs get exposed to the test that we've created, they're going to be like, hey, Lisa, there's a better way to do this. Let's pair and do it. And at the same time, she's teaching them, this test is not so great. We should be testing this for this reason. And the cross-pollination is going to be real. So a growth plan for testers who are in a team perhaps could and probably should include an element of pairing with their dev teammates to kind of say, hey, I need you to start owning this stuff as well. And then we can all, I know the legendary Dr. Nicole Forsgren et al. Wrote Accelerate and scienced the shit out of DevOps. And basically, the more people, if the devs own the GUI automation, it's better for the team. So if, perhaps the question should really be, what's the growth plan for everyone in the team to learn test automation? And what does that look like? And I think novice to advanced, I think it would have to include, there are two, basically, sorry, this is a bit of a ramble, but there are 2 things that I've missed out from growth plans that I think should be in the growth plans. Traditionally, like I said before, and typically it's focused on a tool. We just pick a tool. Usually it's the tool that's the flavor of the month. Right now, that's Playwright.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like, learn Playwright. So we go off and learn Playwright and we find all the resources. But the 2 things that are missing are, like you said earlier, I think we've both said it now, the testing skills.
Yep.
The fundamental testing skills that underpin everything need to be in that growth plan. But also the software engineering skills need to be in that growth plan. And to what degree, I think Noah's chapters that he described hint at something sensible, because what they talk about there is they allude to it being practical, like something practical. So it's not a standard that you can go on. You don't need an external party to say, oh, your website looks beautiful. You need to get it working. And whatever you need to go and learn to get your website working, go get it working. And then you go to the next step. Or another perspective that you could use to answer that question about to what degree and what should they master is maybe take a cue from coding boot camps, because they take people from all walks of life, some of which have had little to no exposure to code before they embarked on this journey, and then get them to a point where they can be employed as capable junior devs.
Yep.
So they've been exposed to pairing. They've been exposed to tools like Git. They've been exposed to databases, and they have this foundational level of knowledge, which could be quite cool. And I know about quite a few free bootcamp materials, like Free Code Camp is the famous one, but there are others. These show notes are going to be sick. These show notes are going to be
There's that
so
website.
sick.
I've not used it. There's the is it roadmap.sh or something similar to that?
Roadmap.sh, yeah. I'll definitely add that in.
But while you were talking about that, though, Vern, so we've both hinted at this generalist specialist role, right? And now you've just kind of said the same thing, but this time talking about novice to advanced. And I think it ties into the second part of Thierry's question. What I want to say is, like, there's a big difference between designing a test framework, and as in a framework that's maintainable, easy to maintain, very readable, than there is to adding tests to an existing framework where the patterns are already in place for you, and you're kind of just basically, fitting your test into existing shapes, for want of a better way of putting it. And I think that when I think of the generalist side of it, I would probably want my, again, I'm not a developer could easily design a framework, but a second point might make that interesting is they could easily design a framework, as could a skilled SDET, right? And both people should be more than capable of adding tests. But if your engineers, developers are now mastering how to write an incredible automation framework, what is being pushed out of their head that's more important to production style work, features, stories, architecting an app that's going to be used by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, right? Because we all joke about finding unicorns, right? There is limited amount of spaces in our head.
It's cognitive you're talking about right now, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, but it also led me to the question that Thierry asked around what's more important, the automation code or the production code? And I've always said that the automation code's more important because it tells you whether your production code is any good or not. However, you don't need to be an incredibly skilled software engineer to write an incredibly good automation framework, because an automation framework doesn't have to be super performant. It's not going to have 1,000 tests running in parallel. Most of the complexity in a test automation framework is hidden inside the APIs and the tools that you download, right? Okay. So, Playwright's masking loads of complexity from you, how to talk to a browser, all that stuff.
Okay.
We don't need to go to that level. You need to master how to learn a tool and master how to structure code around said tool to make it easier to maintain and use. Whereas if you give this to a dev, and I have experience of doing this, even on literally the project that I'm on right now, they often over-engineer automation frameworks to a point where they, like, blocks of code are so generalized, it becomes really hard to know what the hell it's meant to do. And that almost then goes against the testing side of the automation framework, as in it should be readable. I should be able to read what the test is doing and how it's interacting with the API and the code. Whereas in some of your real applications, you can mask a lot of that complexity down in the, lower down and generalize the hell out of it, because that makes it super performant and makes it, it makes, you'll probably end up with a smaller code, like a smaller file, right? Which is great because that means uploading it's quicker and deploying it's quicker and so many other things that you have to care about that you don't have to care about when it comes to an automation framework. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah, I'm not saying that, I'm not saying you don't have to have standards in your framework. You do. And you have to have standards in your production code, but the standards are very different. They're very, very different.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you. It sounds like something we would need to add to Thierry's growth plan is the ability to know what to optimize for, because it sounds like test code is optimized for understanding, which may not make it the most performant or efficient code necessarily. but we
Yes.
need to understand what it's doing, and or when it fails, we want to know instantly, this is the thing that failed.
Maintainability and readability are probably two of the
Okay.
most popular characteristics. Whereas you
Whereas,
just said that in production code,
right,
performance,
right,
file size,
that's
reusability.
there.
Yeah.
And we need to
So
know which end of that, because it's more of a spectrum than a binary thing, right? It's not,
yeah.
this is readable, therefore it's not efficient. It's not that, is it? It's more of
No,
a,
it's not. It's fit for purpose, right? The requirements for the framework are not that it has to be super duper performant and generalized as possible. It's that we have to have tests that are very readable, very easy to maintain, very clear what's happening. So just one example off the top of my head for people that are trying to picture what I mean. We in the project I've been on recently, I've moved everything back into page objects and blah blah blah. Some people hate page objects, whatever, right? But I have probably repeated a lot of code, but that code is now in a method that's very contextual to the page that you're on. That code is the same happening on every page, right? And I could make it generic. I could literally call it, go find the first attached element, wait for it to be visible, and return me the second one. All right, something stupid like that. That's literally what's happening. And I could have that function that's generalized,
abstracted out,
and it could be used by it could be used by all the other stuff. But I chose not to, because when you look at that method, you have no idea what it's doing, because it doesn't read. It basically says it's getting the first of E, as in an element called E, and it's very hard to read. And you can't read it unless you're debugging it in real time, when you can actually see what the values are being passed in. Whereas when it's in the page object, when it's in the language of that page specifically, it will say, I don't know, next button dot wait to be attached dot find checkbox, whatever, right? That's a terrible example now, but you get my point. You can read it and it's contextual to the page. Whereas if you made it all generic, you're just chucking in parameters and you're kind of stitching it together.
But
they sound very, very similar, but it becomes easier to read, and therefore I take the maintainability knock, as in, if that code had to change, I would have to change 10 places instead of one.
So this is what I was going to ask.
For me, it makes it easier to read.
Wouldn't the more competent programmers who may hear this, aren't there ways to get the best of both worlds and kind of say,
absolutely,
I've got the efficient code that I want and everything's abstracted away and looks beautiful in this, one-liner method. But in so doing, could I make it readable and easy to understand, so I don't have to keep traversing down into the code to find out when it actually does something with a thing, and then figure out, okay, which page is this on? Is that possible?
So this is
So
this is great. So in Lego automation class, right, we always people they make their things so complicated, it's brilliant. But
sorry, I didn't interrupt. Lego automation is a workshop that Rich,
it needs to come back, doesn't it?
and I have to insist that they do it again. But anyway, I'll find a link if I can and share it.
The one that comes up all the time is keep it simple, stupid, right? This is the KISS acronym. Comes up all the time. So, and I'm gonna go in a slight, bear with me. Right, the other thing that I think is related to this is another thing that we always see, which is when, and luckily it's dying down a bit, or at least it is in the company I work at. You join the team, it's like, I need 6 weeks, 2 months to build a framework. It's like, what do you mean you need 6 months to build? I've got to build the framework. And it's like, well, no, just like, that's how I used to be the same. It's like, no, I need 6 weeks. I've got to get all my framework, got to structure it all, got to get my folders, got to get all my helpers, got to do all this stuff. And you end up building a load of stuff that you don't even know you need yet. Everyone does it. Whereas if you said, get my first test up and running, get it running on the pipeline. We spoke about this in a few episodes ago. that is so much more efficient. And I think that becomes the trade-off here that we're discussing. It's, yes, I can make it super duper extractive, but what's happening in the wider project right now? What constraints do I have that are stopping me from being able to dedicate time to do that? And that for me moves you into that advanced area of Thierry's question, from novice to advanced. It's knowing when to optimize for certain things and when it's actually, you know what, this is fine. This is not worth making this code as super duper polished as it needs to be because there's other problems.
I think that is optimized. It's not about the efficiency. It's about the value. It's that how quickly can I have something that helps
and solves the problem.
That's what I'm saying.
Without making too many new
Oh,
ones.
fastest way I can solve this problem without worrying about what's it called? Is it Yagni? You're not gonna need it.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I want to make this perfect. Do you know, it's a good job I don't write code, because that would be me. Oh my god! It's like, well, I'm going to need 3 months to make this thing absolutely bellissimo, and then by which time the project has died because we can't do anything.
Yep. And yeah, I've thought of another one as well. I've had the same issue recently where we've gone so generalized that it then, when certain aspects of the app do change, you end up having to pull it out anyway. So you try and make everything work the same way, but then as the app evolves and changes and pages become out of sync with other pages, you end up pulling a lot of that code out into its own method again.
It has to have its own, because
yeah, and you exactly. Whereas for me, I always take we talk about dry, right? Don't repeat yourself. And you joked about developers earlier, but sometimes it's, the second time that I repeat myself, I'm not that bothered at that point. I'll ask the question, I'll ask myself, should I deal with this now? But sometimes I'm not. But, obviously when you get to the 4th, 5th, 6th time, you're probably going to action it because at some point this is going to bite you. But I've also paired with engineers who the first time it's repeated, they're like, right, got to clean this up now. It's like, well, really? You're talking 20 seconds here just to update 2 methods. You're going to take 5 minutes to write a new function that's generalized. So let me do the math. We need to edit that 8-9 times before we get our money back. Do you really need to do that? And that 5 minutes is now slowing us getting the feedback that we need. It's all adds up, right? So I think, like, to wrap this whole episode up, I think that's what it is when it's novice to advanced. Like, it's being like, we talk about senior a lot, right? And moving up, like having those stories and those experiences to know when is the right thing to use. And I think we need to take people on that journey. And you absolutely hit the nail on the head when you shared Alan Richardson's approach. These programs or these development plans need to include using multiple tools and solving the same problem in different ways to give people exposure and that experience and those scars to some extent, and also the frustrations. Like, one of the things me and Mark used to teach in AIT, we used to keep track of the frustration, and we used to openly tell people, I want you to be frustrated right now. I want you to hate the code that's in front of you, because I want you to feel the pain of what it's like. I'm not going to teach you a class where you sit and just follow me and like code along and everything magically works, because that ain't what it's like. So
it's not like Star Wars. You just did a good impression of a software testing Emperor Palpatine. Feel hate flow through you, young SDET.
But honestly, it's true. Like, but yeah, we said we'd spend the whole episode, and we have. So yeah, Thierry, if you listen to this, let us know what you think, and everyone else, let us know.
You beautiful human, you. We should, what we should do, Rich? We should actually come up with one, some kind of growth plan, and we can take our inspiration from Noah and kind of, we don't actually have to write it. We could just do the index page or the it would have these things in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to be sending people to as many different resources as I possibly can think about, because I think it's a really, really interesting question. It's probably something that you've all thought about, and in the interest of what's going on in 2025 and upskilling ourselves and all the rest of it. I think it's a really good question that
Absolutely.
we can either answer in our day jobs or just for ourselves. This is a great topic.
We're entering a massive period of change, I think, for every role.
Yeah.
The generalization aspect of stuff, core engineering skills, core AI skills, core software development skills, like it's all becoming to the forefront now because of the way we can work differently than we have done. So
we've been recording for 56 minutes, so I am going to endeavor not to go wild. But I'm hearing people start to say that there is no point learning software development anymore because AI.
No.
I just want to say that is for me is nuts. Now, some of the people who have been saying that I don't think are software engineers. They're your more entrepreneurial types. But vibe coding does not give you production. Everybody knows this now. They may not have known it 10 weeks ago. It's not scalable code. And for the same reason that when you use these Gen AI tools based on large language models, all this kind of stuff, you do need to know the topic because it will give you nonsense at some point.
Absolutely.
It will tell you something doesn't make sense. And if you're not switched on, you won't notice it. And absolutely the same thing applies for code.
And in our next episode, we're going to talk about this more because we've got a question from Emily, which we could literally start answering right now, but we're not going to.
All kinds of shadowing. So, yes, we're going to get to that question. It's probably going to take the whole episode again.
Absolutely.
But yeah, thanks, Thierry, man. That was absolutely awesome. Thank you for that question.
So there we go. You have any thoughts on this topic? Comment on wherever you see this podcast. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. If you've not shared an episode recently and you liked listening to, please share. To help us boost some of our views and numbers, and that would be hugely appreciated by myself and Vernon.
Yeah, the Vernon Richard Show YouTube channel, podcast listenership also needs a growth plan. So if you can help us with that, that would be absolutely amazing. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next one.